60 million years ago, in a steaming jungle that would one day become Colombia, something was crawling out of a swamp that looked like it belonged in a war zone, not a wetland. Its shell was almost perfectly round, thick as armor plating, and wide enough that a grown man could barely wrap his arms around it. It was not a dinosaur. It was not a crocodile. It was a turtle. But calling it a turtle is like calling a battleship a boat. This was Puentemys mushaisaensis, a creature so strange, so oversized, and so heavily armored that when scientists finally uncovered its remains, they realized they were looking at one of the strangest turtles to ever exist on planet Earth. Today we are going to dig into the story of the giant turtle that looked like a living tank, how it was found, why it grew so big, how it survived alongside the largest snake that ever lived, and what its bizarre round shell tells us about a world that existed right after the dinosaurs disappeared. To really appreciate how strange this animal was, let's compare it to turtles you might actually recognize. Think of the biggest turtle you have ever seen in real life. Maybe a snapping turtle at a local pond or a sea turtle gliding through an aquarium tank. Now imagine that turtle's shell was not long and streamlined, but almost a perfect wheel, roughly the size of a truck tire, thick, heavy, and low to the ground. That is the mental image you need for Puentemys. Modern giant tortoises, like the famous Galapagos tortoise, can weigh several hundred pounds, but even they do not have a shell shape quite like this. Puentemys was not just big for a turtle. It was built differently from almost anything alive today, which is exactly why it caught the attention of paleontologists the moment its fossils came out of the ground. Let's start with the world Puentemys lived in, because you cannot understand this turtle without understanding the nightmare fuel of an environment it called home. About 60 to 58 million years ago, the age of dinosaurs had already ended. The asteroid had struck, the skies had cleared, and life on Earth was rebuilding itself from scratch. In most of the world, animals were still small, still recovering, still testing the limits of a planet without giant reptiles running the show. But in the tropical lowlands of what is now northeastern Colombia, something different was happening. The heat was intense, the rainfall was constant, and an ancient river system regularly flooded the land, creating the perfect conditions for peat, swamp, and eventually coal. The millions of years later, humans would begin mining that coal from a site called the Cerrejón coal mine, and in doing so, they would accidentally crack open one of the richest windows into prehistoric life that paleontology has ever seen. Because as the mining crews dug deeper, they were not just finding coal, they were finding bones, big ones. This same site had already produced Titanoboa, the largest snake to ever exist, a serpent so massive it could have swallowed a crocodile whole. It had also produced Carbonemys, a freshwater turtle roughly the size of a small car. The Cerrejon site seemed to specialize in producing prehistoric monsters, and in a specific pit within the mine known as La Puente, researchers uncovered the partial skull and multiple carapaces and shell fragments of a turtle unlike anything they had documented before. They named it Puentemys mushaisaensis, combining the name of the pit where it was discovered with the region around it. It was, in essence, a name that quite literally means the turtle from the Puente pit. The discovery itself was not the result of a single lucky find. Paleontologists working the Cerrejon site, including researchers from the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute and partner universities, spent years carefully documenting fossils that were only exposed because mining crews were cutting away layers of rock and coal to reach fuel reserves underneath. Every time the excavators dug deeper, they exposed a new slice of a 58 million year old ecosystem frozen in place. Fossil hunters would rush in behind the machinery, often racing against the elements and the mine schedule to recover bones before they were lost to erosion, rain, or further excavation. Piece by piece, they recovered not just one shell, but multiple partial carapaces and plastrons, representing turtles of different ages and sizes, from young individuals to fully mature adults. That kind of sample size is rare in paleontology, and it gave researchers real confidence that the strange round shape was not some fluke of a single deformed fossil, but a genuine, consistent feature of the species. Now here's where things get interesting, because most people picture ancient giant turtles as scaled-up versions of the tortoises and sea turtles we know today. Long, oval-shaped shells built for either walking on land or slicing through water. Puentemys broke that mold completely. Its shell was almost a perfect circle. Paleontologists who studied the fossils described its outline as strikingly close to a wheel, or, as some researchers famously put it, almost like a giant car tire. This was not an accident of preservation or distorted fossil. Multiple specimens representing turtles at different stages of growth all showed the same unusually rounded shape. And it was big. The shell reached lengths of up to 1.5 meters, or about 5 feet across, making Puentemys the largest bothromidid turtle ever discovered, a group of turtles that were common in the age of dinosaurs, but had mostly vanished by this point in history, except apparently in Colombia. Picture that for a second. A turtle the width of a dining table, with a shell shaped less like an oval dome and more like a manhole cover, sitting in a tropical river next to a snake the length of a school bus. This was not a gentle prehistoric pond. This was a landscape built for giants, and Puentemys, with its thick, low, rounded shell, looked every bit like a living tank rolling through the underbrush. And Puentemys was far from the only oversized reptile sharing that swamp. Alongside Titanoboa and Carbonemys, the Cerrejon ecosystem was also home to multiple species of giant crocodiles, including one long-snouted predator that likely specialized in hunting fish and smaller reptiles, and another broader, more powerful species built for tackling larger prey. Layer on top of that a hot, humid climate averaging well above what most reptiles experience today, dense vegetation, and river systems teeming with fish, and you get a genuine snapshot of what an equatorial world without dinosaurs looked like just a few million years after the asteroid impact. It was not empty. It was not quiet. It was, if anything, even more intense than the dinosaur-dominated world that came before it, just with reptiles filling ecological roles in ways we rarely see today. So why on earth did it end up shaped like that? This is where the science gets genuinely fascinating. Researchers have proposed a few overlapping explanations, and they all connect back to the extreme environment Puentemys was living in. First, there is the thermal explanation. Turtles are cold-blooded, meaning they rely entirely on their environment to regulate their body temperature. A wide, flat, circular shell would have maximized the surface area exposed to the sun, allowing Puentemys to soak up heat efficiently and stay active in a hot tropical climate. In other words, its unusual shape may have functioned almost like a solar panel, helping it warm up quickly and keep its metabolism running. Second, there is the hydrodynamic explanation. A flatter, more streamlined shell would have reduced drag in the water, letting this heavy creature move efficiently despite its bulk. Instead of fighting against the current with a bulky dome-shaped shell, Puentemys could glide through slow-moving rivers and swamps with comparatively little resistance, conserving energy in an environment where food had to be hunted or foraged constantly. And then there is the defense explanation, which is honestly the most dramatic one. Remember, this turtle shared its habitat with Titanoboa, a predator estimated to have reached over 40 feet in length. Even a snake that massive has limits to what it can physically swallow. Researchers have suggested that Puentemys, especially fully grown adults, may simply have been too large and too wide for Titanoboa to get its jaws around, even with its mouth open as far as it could go. In a place where nearly every predator seemed to be scaled up to monstrous proportions, growing into a living tank might have been one of the few reliable survival strategies available. Before we go further into how this creature fits into the bigger picture of turtle evolution, let's pause for a second. If you are enjoying diving into these strange, forgotten corners of prehistoric life, creatures most people have never even heard of, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you have not already, subscribe to the channel. We cover discoveries like this one regularly, ancient monsters, bizarre adaptations, and the wild environments that produce them. So subscribing means you will not miss the next one. All right, back to the giant turtle. Scientifically speaking, Puentemys belongs to a family of turtles called Bothromyidids, a group that was widespread and successful during the age of dinosaurs, particularly in the Cretaceous period. Most Bothromyidids disappeared along with much of the reptile world during the mass extinction event that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs. But Puentemys represents something remarkable, the last known surviving lineage of this ancient turtle family, showing up in the fossil record millions of years after its relatives had vanished everywhere else on the planet. It is, in fact, the only known Paleocene-age Bothromyidid ever found in South America, meaning it lived in an evolutionary echo chamber, one of the final holdouts of a group that time had otherwise erased. What makes this even stranger is where its closest relatives come from. Studies comparing Puentemys to other Bothromyidids found that its nearest relation is a turtle called Foxomys, which lived in Europe during the late Cretaceous period, tens of millions of years earlier, and an ocean away. That connection suggests that the ancestors of Puentemys may have made an incredible journey at some point in their evolutionary history, potentially dispersing along ancient coastlines or even drifting across the early Atlantic Ocean on rafts of vegetation or debris, eventually finding their way to the tropical wetlands of South America, where their descendants would grow to enormous size in isolation. This turtle is not just an oddity, it is a clue about how life bounced back after the extinction of the dinosaurs, and specifically why so many reptiles in this hot, humid corner of ancient Colombia grew to such staggering sizes. Scientists have proposed that in the immediate aftermath of the dinosaur extinction, tropical ecosystems near the equator became unusually favorable for cold-blooded animals. Warmer average temperatures can support faster metabolisms and larger body sizes in ectotherms, since their body heat is directly tied to their surroundings. Combine that heat with abundant food, fewer large competing predators left over from the dinosaur era, and vast resource-rich wetland habitats, and you get the recipe for exactly what we see at Cerrejón, a boom in gigantism among snakes, crocodiles, and turtles alike, all thriving in a world still adjusting to life without the dinosaurs. There is also a broader lesson buried in this pattern, one that reaches beyond a single turtle species. The Cerrejon fossils, taken together, function almost like a natural experiment. They show scientists what happens to tropical ecosystems when temperatures spike and dinosaurs are removed from the equation entirely. Rather than staying small and cautious, cold-blooded reptiles seem to have expanded to fill the empty ecological space left behind, growing larger, living longer, and diversifying into a range of habitats and lifestyles. Some researchers have pointed to this period as a preview of sorts, a warning about how tropical ecosystems might respond to sustained heat over long stretches of time, since reptile body size and metabolic activity are so closely tied to ambient temperature. Whatever your take on that broader connection, one thing is clear from the fossil record at Cerrejón. Heat, water, and time turned an ordinary swamp into a breeding ground for giants, and Puentemys was one of the strangest giants to come out of it. And Puentemys was not a one-location fluke either. Years after the original discovery at Cerrejón, additional fossil remains identified as Puentemys mushaisaensis turned up at another site in Colombia hundreds of miles away, closer to the Andes rather than the Caribbean coast. That discovery mattered a great deal because it showed that this giant round-shelled turtle was not just a strange local anomaly limited to one swamp. It had a real geographic range, surviving and reproducing across a broader stretch of ancient Colombia in similarly hot, wet, low-lying environments filled with large crocodiles and giant snakes. Based on where juvenile remains have been found alongside these predators, researchers believe that while fully grown Puentemys may have been nearly impossible to eat, the younger, smaller turtles were almost certainly vulnerable, hunted by the very same crocodiles and snakes that shared their world. Growing into a living tank, it seems, was not a guarantee of safety from birth. It was a survival milestone you had to reach. Try to picture the full scene one more time because it is worth sitting with. A humid, dense, equatorial forest choked with ferns and palms, threaded through by slow rivers and swamps. Crocodiles patrol the shallows. Somewhere beneath the water, a snake longer than a city bus moves in near silence. And crawling along the riverbank, or gliding just beneath the surface, is a turtle the size of a small table, its shell nearly a perfect circle, flattened and armored like a war machine built by evolution instead of engineers. This was not a peaceful postcard version of prehistoric nature. This was one of the most extreme reptile ecosystems in Earth's history. And Puentemys was built quite literally like a tank to survive it. There is one more detail worth sitting with before we wrap up, and it has to do with just how long this lineage managed to hang on. Most of the close relatives of Puentemys had already gone extinct tens of millions of years earlier, wiped out along with the dinosaurs and countless other species during one of the most devastating extinction events in Earth's history. Yet somehow, in this one isolated pocket of tropical South America, a population of both-remitted turtles survived that catastrophe, kept breeding, kept adapting, and eventually gave rise to a creature so specialized, so uniquely shaped, that scientists initially struggled to fit it neatly into the turtle family tree. That is a survival story spanning millions of years, hidden inside the shell of a single fossil turtle, and it only came to light because a coal mine happened to cut through exactly the right layer of ancient rock at exactly the right time. What strikes me most about this story is not just the size of the turtle or even its bizarre circular shell. It is what this creature represents. Puentemys mushaisaensis is a living record of resilience, the last echo of an ancient turtle lineage holding on in an isolated corner of the world, adapting its body into something almost unrecognizable compared to its ancestors, simply to survive in one of the harshest reptile-dominated landscapes the planet has ever produced. It is proof that evolution does not always move in straight, predictable lines. Sometimes it produces a turtle shaped like a tire, thick as armor, big enough to shrug off the jaws of the largest snake in history, quietly rolling through the swamps of a world that had already ended once and was busy rebuilding itself from the ground up. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with this deep dive into one of the strangest turtles to ever exist. If this kind of prehistoric deep dive is your thing, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next one. Drop a comment below telling me which ancient creature you want covered next. And give this video a like if you enjoyed learning about the giant turtle that looked like a living tank. See you in the next one.